It started at exactly 5 a.m. on a cold Tuesday morning when the explosion tore through the silence like a war had broken out in the middle of nowhere. The kind of thunderous, bone-rattling boom that snapped me out of the deepest sleep I'd had in weeks and left my heart hammering in my chest like a jackhammer. My instincts kicked in before my brain could catch up, and I grabbed the shotgun propped next to my bed and sprinted toward the front door. Still in my thermals, my bare feet pounding against the wooden floorboards of the ranch house I'd lived in for over 20 years, a house that had withstood hailstorms, tornadoes, and floods, but had never before been rocked by an explosion that shattered the calm serenity of the valley it stood in. I flung open the door, my breath visible in the frosty morning air, and my eyes immediately landed on the smoldering wreckage of what used to be my front gates, solid steel, reinforced with concrete footers, welded shut most nights, and too sturdy to be taken out by anything short of military-grade equipment, which is exactly what it looked like had been used, because the metal was twisted into mangled wreckage. Black smoke curled upward into the early dawn sky, and a portion of my wooden fence line had been scorched clean through. But that wasn't the most shocking part. No. The real jaw-dropper was the group of 5 men standing just past the wreckage, dressed in dark tactical gear with the words HOA Security Enforcement plastered in bold yellow letters across their backs, holding radios, zip ties, and Joe Quanovan was still holding what looked like a homemade detonator, wide-eyed like he hadn't expected it to actually work. Behind them was a black SUV with a flashing orange light on top and a big white magnetic sign on the side that read, District 12 HOA Compliance Vehicle, which would have been laughable if my property hadn't just been assaulted by a group of lunatics who thought they were some kind of suburban SWAT team. My first thought was that I had finally pushed the HOA to 4 after months of warnings, threats, fines, and one cease and desist letter I had crumpled and used to light my fireplace. They had finally acted on their psychotic promise to enforce compliance, even though my ranch was never part of their development, never subject to their rules, and stood proudly on land that predated their entire community by a good 50 years. You see, the HOA had been creeping down the valley ever since a few greedy developers started selling overpriced homes with promises of quiet country living and community integrity. But my land, all 147 acres of it, sat just beyond their plotted jurisdiction, marked by old barbed wire fences, oak trees, and a long-standing legal boundary that made it clear I owed them nothing, and they hated that. Hated seeing my tractor, my horses, my silo painted like an American flag. Hated hearing the sound of country music playing from my barn speakers while their neighborhood meetings were going on just half a mile away. They claimed my property disrupted the visual cohesion of their luxury development, that my neglected barn and unauthorized livestock were a blight on their pristine community, and that my continued resistance to their codes and demands was grounds for external enforcement. I laughed when they sent me those threats, but I wasn't laughing now. Not as I stood on my porch staring down a group of HOA commandos who had literally blown up my gate to gain entry, acting like they had the authority of law, and had no idea what kind of hornet's nest they had just kicked, because sleeping in my guest room at that very moment, just down the hall, was Sheriff Bill Carter, the county's highest-ranking law enforcement officer, a decorated Vietnam vet, and my longtime friend who had come to stay for a few weeks while recovering from a minor surgery, choosing my quiet ranch to escape the noise of town and spend time fishing, resting, and reading the same Louis L'Amour books he'd been carrying since the 80s. And right as I started to step off the porch, the screen door creaked open behind me, and out stepped Bill, still in his flannel pajamas and slippers, his service pistol holstered but his badge clipped to his belt, his face calm, but deadly serious. And when he saw the damage and the men, his hand went immediately to his radio. "This is Sheriff Carter, badge number 4126, he said into the mic, his voice cutting through the early morning stillness like a whip. "I have 5 individuals on private property posing as law enforcement, possible use of illegal explosives, and I am requesting immediate backup." The men froze. The one holding the detonator looked like he'd swallowed his own tongue. Another started backing away slowly, holding his hands up, and tried to explain. "We're just here for a code violation, sir, we were told," but Bill cut him off. With a voice like thunder, "You were told to stay the hell off private property, you idiot. And now you've just committed a felony, multiple felonies." In fact, I could see the shift in their posture instantly. All that false bravado, that puffed-up confidence of men playing soldier with HOA badges and delusions of authority, it evaporated the moment they realized a real sheriff was present, armed, angry, and fully aware of the laws they had just broken. "Put your hands where I can see them," Bill ordered, stepping off the porch with the kind of presence that made people obey. And 2 of the men complied immediately, dropping their radios and dropping to their knees. The other 3 bolted drawn back toward the SUV, scrambling like panicked rats, and that's when I raised my shotgun and aimed it just above their heads, pulling the trigger and letting a loud warning blast tear through the dawn like a cannon shot, not to hurt them, just to stop them in their tracks. By the time the smoke cleared, the sirens arrived, and the sun had fully crested over the tree line. What began as a rogue, early morning enforcement operation by a delusional group of HOA vigilantes had spiraled into a full-blown criminal investigation, a statewide scandal, and the biggest civil lawsuit my quiet Texas county had ever seen, with legal papers flying faster than bullets and reputations crashing harder than the steel gate they'd blown to pieces. And the best part, Sheriff Bill Carter wasn't just a passive witness, he was the central figure of the entire storm, the sleeping lion they'd accidentally poked with a homemade explosive. And now he was wide awake, locked in, and determined to dismantle the HOA one corrupt brick at a time. You could see it in the way he spoke to his deputies when they arrived. The calm precision of a career lawman who knew exactly how to dismantle a lie from the inside out. As the trespassers were cuffed and hauled off, their bogus HOA Security enforcement badges bagged as evidence, I stood next to Bill watching the chaos unfold on the dirt road that led to my front porch, sipping black coffee from my tin mug while the county forensics team snapped photos of the gate's debris, the burned grass, the tire marks in my pasture, and the shell from my warning shot lodged in an old fence post knot that I needed to prove I fired in self-defense, since the whole thing had been captured on no less than 3 security cameras around my property, not to mention the sheriff's own body cam footage. But as satisfying as that moment was, the real victory came later that day, when Claire Hastings, my attorney and longtime friend, arrived on the property with fire in her eyes and a suitcase full of legal documents, wearing black boots, an aviator, shades and looking every bit like a lawyer who eats petty HOAs for breakfast. She took one look at the blown-up gate, then looked at me and said, "We're going to own these people." And she meant it. Within 48 hours, we filed a civil lawsuit naming every member of the HOA board as defendants. Greg Millstone, the president and former CPA with the Napoleon Complex, Linda Reams, the vice president who once threatened to fine a widow for planting wildflowers, Jacob Thorne, the treasurer with 2 DUIs, and the entire fake security team, including the man who built the explosive device from a mixture of illegal fireworks, gasoline, and sheer stupidity. The lawsuit alleged criminal trespass, destruction of private property, impersonation of law enforcement, assault with a deadly weapon, harassment, intimidation, and more. It totaled over $4.3 million in damages, $3 million in punitive penalties and emotional distress, and $1.3 million in structural, agricultural, and environmental damage to the property, which was not only a working ranch, but also registered as a wildlife conservation area with strict state protections. And as if that weren't enough, Bill had reported the incident directly to the Texas Rangers and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, since the use of explosives on federal conservation land crossed a jurisdictional threshold that kicked this whole mess into the realm of serious federal crimes. By Friday, news vans were parked down the road from my ranch, helicopters buzzed overhead, and the HOA president's home had been raided by federal agents who walked out with boxes of documents, computers, and one very red-faced Greg Millstone, who shouted about overreach and property values, while being shoved into the back of a black SUV. It turns out this wasn't even their first stunt. Bill's investigation revealed that this same HOA board had been bullying residents for years, enforcing bogus fines, using intimidation tactics, and even conducting midnight inspections on properties they deemed incomplete. The community had been too afraid to speak up until now, but once word got out that the sheriff himself had been targeted, the floodgates opened. Residents lined up to give statements, some crying as they described years of harassment their